any kind of thing that can be digitized, and it synthesizes it, and then it uses the prompt that you give it to try to generate something new.
That would be kind of interesting.
I think it's kind of horrifying.
How do I ask questions to elicit a conversation around these things? Now, that question you just asked is a great one.
I guess the easiest way, and the people at Google will be horrified to hear me say this.
Welcome to the Stubbornly Young podcast for people in their 50s, 60s, and beyond who want to remain engaged in the world and relevant to the younger people in their lives. I'm Dave Tabor. In Stubbornly Young, I'm exploring the notion of middle age in a way that's exciting and purposeful for me. This podcast essentially shares my journey, including all its curiosities, with you. Part of staying engaged is knowing what the heck is going on with artificial intelligence. So I'm joined today by Chris Ferris, who's an expert on the subject. And, as much as anybody can be, I don't think we'll stretch Chris's knowledge here today because, well, first his background. He's a senior vice president of digital strategy for Pierpont Communications. He helps their clients develop strategies, including how to leverage AI. He's also a lecturer in management on digital marketing at Rice University. The purpose of this episode of Stubbornly Young is that you and I can get an updated understanding of AI in the world today, perhaps in a few years, and even maybe way out into the future. So, Chris, thanks for helping me on my journey and for being on Stubbornly Young.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm glad you could be. And by the way, I have started using AI more and more. In fact, that was my 2025 sort of one of my goals for the year is to use AI productively to really get a sense for it. And I happen to like Copilot. I know other people like different ones, but that's the Microsoft one. And so here's what I typed in before I got ready, as I was getting ready to talk to you. This is what I typed. I'm interviewing an expert on AI for an adult audience aged 50 to 70, so they can have a practical and useful understanding of AI, so they can engage in conversations about AI with the younger people in their lives. What questions should I ask the expert? So some of the questions in this outline, Chris, came from Copilot's response.
That's very meta of you, Dave. I like it.
But it's so funny. The answers always start with, wow, that sounds like a great blah, blah, blah. So they're very encouraging as well. So let's start though, a few basics about AI. And I don't want to get too basic, but anyway, give us a quick brief, sort of setting the stage of where we are, a couple of minutes.
Sure. Thanks. Before I get into that, I admire you for tackling this on your podcast. So I'm 56 and I plan to retire in about 9 years, 10 years. My wife and I both are, luckily in a good position where we can retire in our mid-60s. So if I didn't ever want to learn anything about AI, I'd probably be okay. I could probably get through the rest of my career without knowing one thing about AI. But that's not how I'm wired. I've been interested in computers and technology. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I've worked in technology in the digital space since the 1990s. So I'm more wired for this, but I admire other folks in our age bracket who want to learn more. So I'm delighted to help maybe give them a little bit of insight into how this all works.
I think that's a good way to level. I mean, really no one, in their 50s, 60s, I mean, probably in your 50s, if you're still working, you probably need to know what's going on. But for those in the audience, like you could live without it, but how much fun would that be? So
exactly.
Catch us up, kind of give us the landscape before we dive into deeper questions.
Sure. So here's how I like to explain AI. Anybody who has a computer or a smartphone has experienced what I call predictive AI. So when you're typing a text on your phone, it will frequently suggest the next word, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're typing an email, if you have your computer set up that way, it'll often suggest the next word. Or if you go to Netflix and you're scrolling through the Netflix interface, it will recommend the next movie that it thinks you should watch. Those are all examples of, again, what I call predictive AI, where these models take what they know about what you're typing or what you've been watching and says, I think here's what you should use next. In other words, what word you should use next. It's trying to predict what you should use. Same thing with the movies. It's saying, I think I'm predicting that you're going to want to watch this movie next based on what you've watched, based on what other people like you have watched. And that's a very familiar form of AI. What that predictive AI doesn't do is it doesn't generate anything new. It is suggesting, it's predicting the next word, but it's not writing it for you, right? It's sort of saying, here's the next word you could use. Here's the next movie you could watch. So it's not generating anything new. And so when we talk about AI today, what really we're talking about is what's called generative AI, because these are AI models that take a bunch of data, and that can be text, numbers, documents, images, videos, any kind of thing that can be digitized, and it synthesizes it, and then it uses the prompt that you give it to try to generate something new. So every result that you get from any kind of AI model, any kind of generative AI model, is going to be something new based on your prompts. Now, the quality of what you get has a lot of different factors, and we can dive into that. But it's generating something new, something that didn't exist 30 seconds ago before you gave it the prompt.
That's a good way to put it. So, and ultimately the difference between, AI, certainly generative AI, which you've explained is creating something new, and what seemed to be in the discussions around AI, which to me almost seemed like just computers, massive computers generating a lot of data fast, options, flowcharts, essentially decision trees, which don't really create something new. They're really synthesizing something that's already happened. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm not a computer programmer. I'm not an AI programmer, but everything I read and understand says that what you said is correct. Like what we think of as regular AI is what you described. It's like a decision tree. If this, then that. So it says, if this person has typed these 10 words previously, then it's probably going to be this word. So now here's my next question, Dave. How often does it get it right when it's predicting your next word when you're typing text?
Yeah. Increasingly so. I think, predictive typing 2 years ago gave me crap, and now it's actually coming close to what I want.
But it's not perfect, correct?
No, correct.
Right. And the movies that Netflix recommends to you, not always perfect either, right?
No, but I have a pet peeve about Netflix. They don't even tell you what people want. They just give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, which is my suspicion that they just want you to absorb any content they have. But anyway, that's a separate side. But they are using AI, right, to predict. Well, no, now I'm getting down the wrong tree, right?
Yeah, that's predictive AI. But what Netflix isn't doing is that it's not taking the previous things that you liked in Netflix. It's not saying, oh, Dave, then the last month you watched these 5 movies and you watched them all the way through and you gave them thumbs up. It doesn't generate a new movie for you.
Yeah. That would be generative AI.
Correct. Now, I think maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but at some point, I think that is going to that's something that could start happening, is that a lot of these places that we rely on for movies, music, even things that we like to read, they're going to start trying to, and I don't think this is a good thing necessarily, but these generative AI tools could start generating things that you would like based on what you've watched before, and it would generate new content.
That's so interesting. So if I like a certain storyline with a certain kind of ending and a certain kind of character, at some point, I'll be willing to pay, or maybe it's part of my subscription, but to have content that is exactly what I want to watch. That would be kind of interesting.
I think it's kind of horrifying. I love movies. I love reading books. I'm a big music fan. And I worry that when I'm listening to Spotify, for example, I listen to music all the time on Spotify, that it's going to start giving me auto or AI generated music. And I don't want that. I want human generated music. Now,
but would you know the difference?
See, that's the thing. And that's the big question is, if you knew something was generated by an AI, would that change how you felt about it? I don't know. But to your point, if you said, wow, that's a great song. I like the lyrics. The chorus is good. I like the melody. I tapped my foot to it. And then if you found out it was AI generated, would it change how you felt? I think it probably would, but maybe not in 20 years.
Maybe not for our kids, but maybe for me, maybe for you. That's an interest. That question you just posed, if you knew something you love was generated by AI, would you change your perception? That would be, because one of the questions I was going to ask you later is like, how do we ask questions to engage maybe in my case, my sons are 28 and 31. How do I ask questions to elicit a conversation around these things? Now, that question you just asked is a great one.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm glad you
Yeah.
like that. I think
All
about
right.
these
Now,
things a lot.
yes. So, all right. So, backing up a little, like, what are some common misconceptions about AI?
That, gosh, that's a good question. Some misconceptions about AI. That it has agency. So we can talk about this more later, but there are the next wave in AI are called AI agents. And some people have been claiming that these are autonomous, meaning they can operate on their own. And of course, that makes people think of Skynet and Terminator, movies that we remember from the 80s and 90s. I don't, again, not a programmer, not an AI expert. I don't think that there is an immediate concern of AI tools becoming autonomous and just running amok and doing things that we don't want them to do. Now, they are smart and they will try to please the initial precepts and commands from its initial mission, but I don't think at this point that they are going to, become autonomous and build robots and partner with Boston Robotics and make Terminator type machines. I don't think that's really in the cards.
Well, ever is a long time. So I don't know. All right, let's get down to some more practical, like today kinds of stuff. And then we may think some more about futuristically. But like, how is AI currently being used in everyday technology that listeners might interact with? Things like smartphones, smart home devices, even their own healthcare. What are some things that are happening now that are AI, not predictive, but actual, maybe generative AI that we're using now?
Sure. Well, so there's two ways. I want to make a distinction between the two kinds of AI. So there's generative AI, which we've been talking about a lot, which is like you used Copilot to give you questions, right? And lots of knowledge workers should be using AI to make them more efficient, more creative at their jobs. So I think there's a lot of examples of knowledge workers using AI, just like you did. I wanted a little help with brainstorming the questions for this interview I'm doing later today.
Yeah.
Lots of knowledge workers use it to generate content. Now, if you're a good knowledge worker, you don't want to use AI and then just publish it straight away. So, for example, the outline of questions you had, it wasn't perfect, right? You probably looked at it and edited it and made some notes. So, So if you're a knowledge worker, again, whether you're 22 or 62, if you're a knowledge worker, you can make things go a little faster at work by using a generative AI tool, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT, Google Gemini. There's other ones like Perplexity or Claude. These are all tools that can help give you some intellectual shortcuts for a lot of the work you do. Can I curse on this podcast?
Yeah, of course.
So my wife and I have a joke about there are things around the house that we call SLJs, which stand for shitty little jobs. Knowledge workers have SLJs too, and you can often leverage an AI tool to take care of a lot of those SLJs for you. For example, another way that we use it a lot at Pierpont, we're a public relations firm. We spend a lot of time interviewing subject matter experts about a particular topic. And oftentimes we'll interview 3, 4, 5, 6 subject matter experts at the same company. And then we'll take a transcript of all of our interviews, and then we'll have an AI say, find the common themes across the 5 subject matter experts. So we could do that ourselves, right?
Yeah, it would take hours.
It would take hours. And the AI tools are really good at things like that. Now, of course, we would review it and make sure that it was correct before we went back to the client, say, hey, here are the 5 themes that we heard across all the subject matter experts. But that's a way that we as knowledge workers use AI.
So now what about, we're hearing things like, how new smartphones are enabled with AI. Like, what are they talking about with that?
So it's a little bit of BS, I think.
That's kind of what I'm wondering, but go ahead.
It's a little bit of BS. Mostly it's just they're integrating the basic tools that are available to everybody already, whether it's Google Gemini, which is the Google version of ChatGPT, or the Microsoft Copilot, which you were using, you said earlier today. Really, they're just integrating they're integrating it and making it more visible on your phones so you can use it to try to get help with answering questions and things like that. I don't think they really know what they're going to do with it yet. They're just saying it's AI enabled.
But why do they need to have a special chip in a phone to make it AI enabled? They're talking about AI enabling chips and things. I get it if you're doing like massive data crunching, but why do you need it in a phone?
I don't know that they really do. I think it's just a little bit of marketing. Most of the processing isn't done on your phone. It's done in the cloud at a data center.
Yeah.
So it's not as if your phone it's not like there's an AI embedded in your phone in this new chip.
Yeah, that's what they make it sound like though, right?
Yeah. I think it's a little, I mean, I work in marketing and it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors on the marketing folks at
so
these phones
basically you got a chip in your phone, but really if you're doing any kind of artificial intelligence stuff with any of those tools you mentioned, it's getting all that processing's happening via the cloud and bouncing back to your phone to deliver the content.
Exactly. So.
Okay. So so you mentioned knowledge workers. What are some other examples that we might use in our day-to-day life that actually where AI actually does enhance our ability to be happy, be productive, whatever?
Yeah. So some people use AI tools just to help them brainstorm things to do for fun. This is a very, mundane example, but you can go to an AI tool and say, I'm visiting Denver for the week. I have some spare time in the evenings. What should I do the week of January 21st? Because I'm going to have some spare time while I'm visiting Denver. And the generative AI tool could go out and it would look at social media posts, news articles from local publications, Reddit threads, all kinds of things. And it would find all these sources. And then it would give me back an original answer to say, hey, Chris, thanks for asking. Here are some things that I think you might enjoy doing in Denver. And then I could go back and say, well, I don't really want to spend my time indoors because it's so beautiful here. Rewrite this and focus it more on outdoor activities. And then it would give me a slightly different answer. And I'd say, okay, give me ones that I can get to from downtown that are relatively close. And then you can keep refining the answers. Yeah. So again, that's kind of a mundane example, but that's a way that I actually did use AI when I was getting ready for my trip here. I love Denver. It's a lovely city. I'm a big outdoors person, so I asked it some things to do. And so today, for example, I walked around by City Hall. Yeah. The hotel I'm staying in is right by City Hall, and the AI said you should, if you like going outdoors and you don't want to go far, try the City Hall around the corner. And it was lovely. I walked around in the snow, got some fresh air, a little sun. It was great.
Yeah. Now, all right. So what's the difference between using, in quotes, artificial intelligence to do that versus like a computer that just is scanning calendars and delivering an outcome?
So I think what you're asking is what's the difference between using Google and using like Gemini?
Yes, that's a good way to ask that.
So, and this is where Google is really putting a lot of emphasis on Gemini, which is its version of AI, of generative AI.
Yeah.
Because Google has become, in my view, polluted with too many other things. So if I were just to ask, what are some things to do outside, a similar query in Google, what are some things to do outside in Denver in January if the weather's nice if I'm visiting? It would not give me an answer. It would give me a bunch of links. And it would give me a bunch of links to probably TripAdvisor, maybe a Denver publication that gave me a list of things to do, maybe something from Patagonia Magazine who had published an article about Denver a couple of years ago. And I would have to pick through and read each of these responses and decide which ones I liked. The difference is that what generative AI will do is it will take not just those three sources that I just mentioned, but probably 10, 20, 30, maybe 50, I don't even know. And it will synthesize and generate a new answer that's a lot easier for me to digest. So it's doing the work for me. I could do what you described. I could go and read each of those different examples, or I can have the AI tool read them for me, synthesize them, and I've got my list in 30 seconds.
It's kind of like going to a trusted advisor for advice rather than somebody saying, well, here are your 12 options. It's like, here's what I think you should do.
Yeah, I characterize generative AI as like a pretty smart but very forgetful intern.
Okay. Actually, my results have been stronger than that.
Okay.
Like these questions, not all of them, but some like, I should have thought of that. I'm glad, Gemini suggested it. Like, yeah, I've had smart interns before, but I think Gemini's smarter personally.
It's getting smarter. It's getting smarter all the time. Yeah.
Okay. So those are some personal things. In business, we keep hearing how AI is going to, sort of change the way companies operate. Everybody, that there's new medical research that's going to happen. What are a couple more specific examples that are sort of high level, but they're really kind of indicative that this is going to change our world?
Okay. So I'm going to give one more generative AI example, and I'm going to give you two what are called agentic AI examples.
Okay.
So a regular generative AI example is computer programming. So I know how to program a little bit, but I'm not a programmer. But everything I've read and everybody I've talked to says that these generative AI tools are super good at programming and they're getting better all the time. And it's not going to put programmers out of a job, but let me rephrase that. It's not going to put every programmer out of a job, but slow, mediocre programmers should be very worried because these generative AI tools can do a lot of the programming for them.
Yep.
And so if you are a programmer, I would be very worried about my job, unless you're an excellent programmer, because you still need to evaluate the quality of the programming that's done and be able to fix any bugs. But again, everything I've understood is that these generative AI tools are going to make computer programming very, very different very quickly.
Oh, I was talking to a friend's son who's wrapping up his PhD stuff on, he's looking for black holes using math to do it. And just for fun, I went to ChatGPT and said, what's something you would solve with code? And he told me, and we put it in, and he looked at the code, he goes, that's pretty good. So, and in like 10 seconds, and I didn't know what he was reading. I didn't know what it looked like, to me. But anyway, that was interesting. So, okay, now the other kind of AI
is what's called AI agents or agentic AI. So again, some people claim that agentic AI is autonomous, and it's not really. What it can do is take prompts from a human and then work independently. So the example I gave you a few minutes ago where I was saying how I iterated with AI about what I should do when I'm in Denver. And agentic AI, once you give it the prompt, it will go and find the answers, evaluate the answers, redo its analysis, look for more data, and keep doing it on its own. So it's quasi-autonomous, but it needs a prompt from a human. So these AI agents are able to work independently to make decisions and then come back to the human user with an output. So an example of agentic AI would be an agentic customer service agent. So you and I and everybody our age has been on a website where a little pop-up window says, "How can I help you?" And it's not a person. It's a predictive AI model, right? Where you can only ask it certain things, and it can't really function independently. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Would you like to speak to customer service? Yes, that's what I want in the first place. But if companies can figure out how to leverage AI agents, because they'll be able to act independently. And if you give it a response that says, "That's not what I'm asking for," it will be able to better figure out what you want and iterate and give you answers without having to go back to a human to check what it's doing. Another example of agentic customer service would be, and this is a little bit more esoteric, but an agentic customer service agent would predictively assess whether your delivery from Amazon is going to be late. It would then notify you either by a text or email, whatever you put into the database for Amazon, and proactively offer you an apology, maybe a discount to sweeten the disappointment. So that would all happen without human intervention.
So right now, there are also conversations around things like privacy and data security concerns that we should protect against with AI, and maybe it's, again, more of the fears that, they're reading everything, they're collecting everything. I don't know. But what should we be worried about? What's practical? What do you think about it? How do you think about it?
In terms of privacy concerns?
Yeah, privacy and protecting against, misuse of data that's part of the machine.
Yeah. At Pierpont, we use Copilot like you do, but we use it in a very prescribed way. So if we are using it with any kind of client-related information, we have to make sure that all of our employees are logged in with their Pierpont ID, because we have Microsoft as our whole Office suite. So we get Copilot built in to our Office, our Microsoft Office offerings. And then they have to check to make sure that there's a little green badge above the prompt, which says, "We will not use any of this information to train any other AI models or share your information with any other AI users." Now, we're still giving the AI, in this case, Microsoft company, a bunch of data, but it's in their best interest to protect it because that's something that they can use to train their model. They don't want it to get out anywhere. I mean, this is true of every technology we use. I mean, people have been giving away their personal data for 20 years, right? If the product is free, you're the product.
Yep, that's right. So do you worry more about data privacy and when you're using these tools, or do you just, from a personal standpoint, you just have to accept that this is where life is and that's it? I mean, I don't know. Do you throw your hands up?
It's the same baseline level of concern I have about any technology that we use that we don't pay for.
Yeah. Well, that's a cynically reasonable approach, or reasonably cynically approach.
I view it as it's just, it's the way of the world. You can choose not to participate in all these things, and that will it's hard because that will limit your ability to do lots of different things. I don't, this doesn't have to be a conversation about Meta, but I don't like some of the choices that Meta has made in the last couple of weeks about how they're going to moderate content and things like that. But it's part of my job. I got to understand, like, how does Facebook work for my clients? How does Instagram work for my clients?
Yeah.
If I want to keep up with my friends from high school, I got to still be on Facebook. So it's trade-offs.
It seems like
hard.
People can make a choice, and this is more sort of to my audience than, this conversation directly. But, the idea that, okay, we can just say, I don't want to be part of that, for whatever rationalizing reason. But if we're not part of it, then we're really not part of the world as it is.
Yes.
Is sort of how I look at that.
Yes. And my view is that, and there are lots of other concerns. So these AI companies are using just massive amounts of energy and power. And I don't know if you heard that Microsoft has decided to invest in nuclear power because they think that's a good alternative. And there are lots of concerns that we should have about how AI can be used for mis or disinformation. It's really easy to generate a bunch of slop and put it out on the internet. And it's harder and harder for people to be able to tell what's real and what's not real.
Well, sure. I mean, you can use AI tools today I could make you look like you're saying something horrible and post it.
Yes.
Very tough to unwind that stuff.
Yes. So my view is that all of these technology companies generate what are called in economics externalities. I don't know if you've ever studied economics, but an externality is basically a side effect from something that a business or a company or an industry does. And
generally that has a cost to society.
Usually, yes. And for most of the 20th century, there was sort of this push-pull between industry and government, of government trying to allow, industry to grow, to thrive, to make America a successful, powerful economy, while safeguarding against some of the more nefarious or pernicious or dangerous externalities. And my concern is that the federal government, both parties, this is not a partisan argument, have, since the 1990s, neglected to put into place safeguards, protections, punishments to try to incentivize these technology companies to reduce the externalities they cause.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see things around, ways it influences children. We're starting to see ways. I mean, even now the debate about phones in schools and other things like that. I mean, these are the externalities you're talking about. Now, so when you think about, I want to switch gears a little bit because the big siren song or whatever you'd call it is like, AI is going to enhance human performance. It's going to shift jobs to people who can use AI, but it won't replace people. Well, I mean, it to me, those kinds of spoutings are by people who don't really know the future. And of course we don't, but you know the future. So what is AI going to do to jobs, to the, in your perspective?
So I do not know the future. I appreciate that compliment. However, I do read a lot. And the World Economic Forum just in the last week issued a jobs report, and it estimates that AI will generate 170 million jobs, but it'll be offset by the loss of 92 million jobs with a net growth of about 78 million jobs. So there's going to be a lot of churn in the marketplace, particularly for knowledge workers. And I find this a little bit, I don't know if ironic is the word, but for decades, a bunch of pointy-headed intellectuals would say to industrial workers who are being displaced by machinery, robots, like, well, you got to just retrain yourself. And now those are the safe jobs. A plumber cannot be replaced by AI, right? A builder cannot be replaced by AI. And so all these knowledge workers are now having to face the reality that, industrial blue collar workers have been facing for 100 years.
It's although, it'll be interesting to see how the pay shifts around those things. We're already seeing, plumbers. I was recently talking to a friend. I'm like, if I were to coach my kids now about how to make sure that they could be successful financially in life, of course, one, yes, you can still be an AI programmer if you're at the high end. But the other is like, go get a business degree and learn how to be a plumber and start a plumbing business. Like that's like, you're right. I know you're talking, and AI can't fix that. They can tell you what might be wrong, but they can't fix the pipe.
No, maybe in decades or hundreds of years when, like I said, they team with Boston Robotics and they create a robot that can come in and fix your plumbing.
Yeah.
But that's
not in our lifetime, not in
probably
not in anybody's life that we know now. So, So where do you say AI in 10 years? Is that just too far to even think about it?
Yeah. And
it seems like it might be.
Things are evolving so fast that it's hard to predict. I think there'll be a lot of job displacement. I think, again, a lot of knowledge workers, whether it's bank tellers or data entry workers or executive secretaries, like a lot of those kinds of jobs are going to go away. And so there's going to be a lot of displacement within the economy of certain jobs going away and certain jobs being grown or people being more efficient, right? Like I said, if you can get AI to take care of a lot of the SLJs that you have to do at work, and that allows you to do the more meaningful, creative, impactful work, that's great. So I think it could be a net positive.
Yeah,
for
as long
job
as you're
growth.
the one who's still got a desk.
Right.
I mean, seriously, yeah.
Yeah.
So should we, in the grand scheme of things, should we be net scared of AI, or should we be net enthusiastic about what it does for the world? What's your take?
I liken it to where we were with the internet 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the internet was nascent. Netscape was kind of percolating around. Google didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. And nobody really quite knew. Most people didn't even have email at work. And now 30 years later, we can't imagine really any business of any sort existing without the internet. And I think that we'll be in the same place in maybe not 10 years, but 30 years, where there will be there'll be very few businesses or industries that are untouched by AI. And so we got to figure it out. And the sooner you as an individual or as a business can figure it out, the better position you're going to be in long term.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you wanted to, we touched on this a little earlier, if you wanted to have a substantive conversation with my adult sons about AI, or, how would you approach the conversation? You mentioned, we had one question earlier, but how would you approach it? Because they see it through a different lens.
Yeah. So my kids are a little bit younger than yours. My son's 18. He's a freshman in college, and my daughter just graduated from college. And I've talked to them both about AI. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my son, I've asked him how he uses AI and whether his professors talk to him about it. And he said, no, they don't really talk about it that much. And I said, well, John, you need to know how to use it, but use it ethically within the allowed parameters of your university, because universities do have AI policies, at least most of them do. So I've told them you need to figure out how to use it, and whether you're not to become an AI programmer, just to make yourself better. I said, for example, when you're studying something for one of your classes, I would advise you to use AI to give you a study guide. Create a study guide for yourself. And he said, oh, Dad, I've already done that. And I said, oh, great. That's my son.
Ha, cool. Yeah.
So, and for my daughter, she graduated in 2024, right as AI was really starting to become important.
Yeah.
And she had a very different take. She said, well, I don't want to use AI because I'm worried that the more people use AI, the more people are going to lose their jobs. And I said, sweetie, that's so sweet. And I love that you are so empathetic and you want to help people. But as my daughter, I want you to know how to use AI for your job. And people are going to lose their jobs whether you use AI or not, sweetie. And so I advised her to learn how to use AI for her job. She wants to be a therapist when she grows up, or when she gets out of graduate school.
Yeah.
And
like a human therapist. Like a psychology type.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I said, you can use AI to to take care of all the things that you don't want to have to do so that you can spend more time thinking about your patients, talking to your patients. So use it as a way to give you more time to do the things that are the most important and impactful to you and your patients. And that resonated with her a little bit.
That's cool. Last question, last thing I want to talk about is like, okay, for somebody who's listening who hasn't been playing around with AI, I mean, how would you frame or put in context, like how to start? Like what kind of a topic, like for example, what kind of problem could somebody want to, I don't even know how to ask this. What might they ask themselves to explore ways to find opportunities to use these tools?
I guess the easiest way, and the people at Google will be horrified to hear me say this, but if there is a query that you would typically enter into just a regular Google search, try it in an AI model. See if you like the kinds of answers you get better. Now, if you just want to know what time it is, or if you want to know what time it is in Italy, just use Google for that. But if you want to know about what are some of the things that I could do on a trip to Italy and Rome during this time of year, and do a little compare and contrast, try it in Google, try in maybe in Gemini, and see what you like. So think of things that you typically use Google for and try one of the AI models and see if you like the results better.
That's a great way to frame it up. A really great way to frame it up. And I'm going to try that. So I think that's a great note to end on, and really appreciate it, Chris. That's it for episode 18 of the Stubbornly Young podcast for people in their 50s, 60s, and beyond who want to remain engaged in the world and relevant to the younger people in their lives. Chris, really glad you joined me. Thanks for the conversation. Chris, this is Chris Ferris. Really appreciate it.
Dave, it was really a pleasure speaking to you. I enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to talking with you again sometime.
Good. Hey, and I'm Dave Tabor. If you've got friends and family who are stubbornly young, please recommend that they give it a listen. And if you've got ideas for episodes and content, let me know at dave@stubbornlyyoung.com. Glad you've joined me on this journey.